There's a cost to staying quiet, and it's not always visible at first. You think you're being polite. You think you're avoiding conflict. You think silence is strength. But over time, that silence becomes a prison. You bury your truth under the weight of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, judged, rejected. And one day you wake up and realize you don't recognize your own voice because you gave it away in little pieces every time you stayed quiet when you should have spoken. Every time you nodded in agreement just to keep the peace. Every time you let someone make decisions for you, speak over you, or define you, you don't notice the damage when it happens in moments. It's subtle. One sentence you hold back. One opinion you swallow. One time you don't correct the lie about who you are. But over time, those moments stack, they become your default. Until your silence is no longer a choice, it's your identity. And that identity isn't real. It's curated to make other people comfortable. It's built to be accepted. But it's hollow. Because nothing authentic thrives in silence that comes from fear. And the longer you wait to use your voice, the harder it becomes to even remember what it sounds like. You lose power when you silence yourself. Not just external power, internal. You start second-guessing everything. You overanalyze your thoughts. You ask for permission to feel what you feel. You wonder if your perspective is valid, just because it's never been validated by anyone else. And that spiral, that loss of inner certainty, is what keeps people small. You think you're playing it safe, but really you're disappearing one layer at a time. And eventually, you become the version of yourself that causes the least resistance. Not the one that carries the most truth. Speaking up doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it's just saying no and meaning it. Sometimes it's correcting the story someone else tried to tell about you. Sometimes it's walking away from the conversation that disrespects you and not apologizing for doing it. Your voice isn't just in your words. It's in your choices. It's in what you accept. It's in what you stop tolerating. But you don't get there unless you learn how to feel discomfort and still speak. You don't build strength by avoiding conflict. You build it by knowing you can handle it without losing who you are. People will write the story for you if you don't speak. They'll assume your silence is agreement. They'll take your hesitation as weakness. And they'll use it as proof that you don't really know yourself. That's how power gets stripped. Quietly. Not in one big moment, but in all the little ones where you felt the urge to speak and didn't. Where you felt the heat rise in your chest, your hands get tight, your breath catch. But you stayed quiet because you wanted to be liked. Because you didn't want to be too much. Because you thought silence was graceful, not realizing that the world doesn't reward polite suppression. It rewards clarity. It rewards certainty. It rewards people who know what they stand for. And say it, no one else can hand you your voice. You don't find it in a book or on a stage, or in someone's validation. You find it when you start trusting your gut over someone else's comfort. When you stop waiting for permission. When you stop editing your truth so it fits someone else's expectations. That voice you've been hiding, it's still there. Underneath the years of compliance. Underneath the people-pleasing. Underneath the fear of being misunderstood. It never left. You just stopped listening. And the longer you delay its return, the more you'll regret every moment you spent being less than who you are. There are conversations you'll never get back. People you should have stood up to. Moments where you should have said enough. And maybe you didn't because you didn't know how. Or maybe you didn't think you were worth it yet. But the regret that lingers doesn't come from what they said. It comes from what you didn't. It comes from knowing you left your power on the table. That you had the words, but not the courage. And that kind of regret cuts deep because it was never about them. It was about you not choosing you. Don't let that continue. Don't let silence keep stripping pieces of you just to keep things smooth on the surface. Speak when it's hard. Speak when it's shaky. Speak when your voice trembles. That's not weakness, that's power. That's the beginning of something stronger than silence. Because once you start using your voice for yourself, you stop needing everyone else to speak for you. You stop seeking approval. You stop shrinking. You stop disappearing in rooms that were never too big. You were just made to feel small. And the second you remember that, you stop giving your voice away for free. There's a quiet moment when you realize the disrespect didn't start with them. It started with you. With the first time you let something slide. The first time you laughed off the comment that made your stomach twist. The first time you said, "It's fine." when you knew damn well it wasn't. You weren't being forgiving. You weren't being chill. You weren't being kind. You were teaching them how to treat you. You were teaching them that their comfort mattered more than your dignity, and what you allow is what continues. You don't lose respect in big moments. You lose it in the slow erosion of boundaries, in the look you didn't challenge, in the favor you agreed to out of guilt, in the apology you gave even when you weren't wrong. You were trying to keep the peace, trying to be liked, trying to avoid tension. But that kind of peace is rented. It isn't real. Because the more you abandon yourself to make others feel better, the more resentment you build inside. And eventually, you don't just feel disrespected by them. You feel betrayed by yourself. People don't magically wake up and decide to treat you badly. They observe, they notice, they test, they cross one line, and if nothing happens, they go a little further. It's not always intentional, it's human nature. We train people, we set the tone. We either show them that we are rooted in who we are, or we show them we can be moved. And once they realize you won't hold the line, they stop respecting the space around it. Not because they're evil, but because you've made it easy. Boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about showing people how to love you correctly. But you can't do that if you're still confusing love with tolerance. If you're still believing that letting people walk all over you is the cost of connection. If you're still swallowing your needs so you can look easygoing. That kind of loyalty to others while betraying yourself will burn you out. It will empty you, and one day, it will wake you up full of regret, because you'll realize they were never the problem. You were the one who kept unlocking the door they walked through. There's a lie we've been fed, especially in early relationships and family dynamics, that strength is being able to take it. That being the bigger person means turning the other cheek again and again. That maturity means letting things go for the sake of harmony. But maturity without boundaries is just emotional servitude. Being the bigger person doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. It means knowing when to walk away with your head held high and your energy intact. You can't teach respect with explanations. You teach it through action, through decisions, through presence. You teach it by no longer answering calls from people who only call when they need something. By no longer entertaining conversations that leave you feeling smaller. By no longer saying yes when your gut says no. You don't have to yell. You don't have to fight. You just have to stop showing up in spaces that ask you to abandon yourself. That's not drama. That's clarity. They might call you selfish when you stop being available for their convenience. Let them. They might say you've changed. Let them. Growth will always look like betrayal to people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. And their discomfort is not your cue to shrink again. It's a sign that you're finally choosing yourself. And when you do that consistently, the right people won't be offended by your standards. They'll be grateful for them. This isn't about being hard or cold. This is about being clear, about protecting your peace, about showing up for yourself in the same way you've shown up for everyone else. Because if you keep trying to earn respect by being overly available, overly forgiving, overly accommodating, you'll end up depleted. You'll end up invisible. And worst of all, you'll end up being the person who taught everyone else that your needs didn't matter. You don't have to be cruel, but you do have to be firm. You do have to decide what you will and will not tolerate, and then live like you mean it. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's someone close, especially when you feel guilty. Because boundaries don't work if you only apply them to strangers. They work when you're willing to enforce them across the board. Even when it's inconvenient, even when it hurts, even when it costs you approval. One of the hardest lessons you learn is that respect is not freely given, it's shaped, built, reinforced. And if you don't actively participate in shaping how others treat you, they will shape it for you. Based on their needs, their values, their comfort. And none of that will have anything to do with your truth unless you make it known. Unless you make it non-negotiable. Unless you draw the line and hold it without apology. There's something you realize too late. Not everyone deserves your story. Not everyone deserves your past. Not everyone deserves to know what broke you, what healed you, what keeps you up at night. Just because someone is curious doesn't mean they're safe. Just because someone listens doesn't mean they're loyal. And just because someone says they care doesn't mean they'll protect what you share. The mistake people make is confusing attention with trust. But attention can be bought, faked, borrowed. Trust is built, slowly, carefully. And if you haven't built it yet, you don't hand them your scars. You think you're connecting. You think you're being open, real, honest. But what you're actually doing is offering your most tender truths to people who haven't proven they can carry the weight of them. And when they drop it, when they mishandle it, when they use it to cut you later, you're left wondering why it hurts so badly. It hurts because you gave the most fragile part of you to someone who never earned it. And now they don't just know what happened. They know where to aim. People will ask for your truth like they've earned it. They'll say, "You can trust me," without ever showing you what they've done to deserve it. And in moments of loneliness or desperation or that aching human need to feel seen, you'll be tempted to hand it over. You'll want someone to hold it. You'll want someone to say, "Me too." But that moment of connection becomes regret if you offer it to the wrong person. Because some people don't want your healing. They want your vulnerability. Not to support it, but to study it. To understand where your edges are, so they can get close. So they can pull you apart later if it suits them. You don't owe transparency to everyone who looks interested. Real strength is learning how to sit with yourself long enough to not bleed every time someone looks like they care. Real strength is knowing how to be open selectively, not recklessly. Because oversharing feels like relief in the moment, but it leaves you wide open after the fact. You walk away wondering, why did I say all that? You feel exposed. You feel raw. And that's because deep down, you knew they hadn't earned that version of you. People confuse vulnerability with wisdom. But they're not the same. Vulnerability is honest. Wisdom is discerning. You can be open and still know when to close the door. You can be real and still be guarded with people who haven't shown you the maturity, the care, or the consistency to earn access. You don't have to be cold to be protected. You don't have to be fake to be safe. You just have to stop giving away pieces of your soul to people who haven't proven they'll protect it when you're not in the room. Watch how they listen. Watch how they talk about other people's stories. Watch how they respond to your silence, not your openness. That's the test. That's where you see if they're here to truly connect, or if they're here for emotional entertainment. And if you fail that test enough times, you start mistaking exposure for intimacy. You start thinking you're being courageous by being transparent, when really you're just reliving your wounds in front of people who are only half paying attention. There's no weakness in keeping your story to yourself. There's strength in knowing your story is not public property. There's wisdom in sharing with those who are safe, not those who are simply available. If they rush you to open up, ask why. If they make you feel guilty for keeping parts of yourself private, walk away. If they only come closer when you bleed emotionally, close the door, because real ones don't need you to collapse to feel close to you. They'll wait, they'll hold space, and they'll never make you question if your silence means you're not worth their time. Learn to love your privacy. Learn to feel powerful in your restraint. You don't have to narrate every chapter of your life out loud for it to matter. You don't have to relive your trauma in conversations that weren't built to hold it. Sometimes, the most healing thing you can do is stay silent and let the part of you that used to overshare rest. Let her feel safe inside of you. Let her feel like she doesn't have to perform pain to be seen anymore. You can outgrow the version of yourself that leaked emotions in hopes of connection. You can become someone who carries truth with quiet confidence. Who doesn't need to prove their depth with vulnerability at every table? Who knows that her story is not an offering, but a legacy? And only those worthy of it should be allowed to witness. There's a myth we've all bought into. And it's the idea that being busy equals being important. You fill your calendar. You stay moving. You say yes to everything. And from the outside, it looks like momentum. But when you stop even for a moment, what you feel isn't peace, it's emptiness. Because being busy isn't the same as being fulfilled. It's not the same as being aligned. It's not the same as living a life that feeds your soul, instead of just draining your schedule. But you don't see it until it's already cost you something. Your health, your joy, your relationships, your time. You don't even realize you're living on autopilot until you try to rest and feel guilty for it. Until silence makes you anxious. Until the idea of doing nothing feels like failure. That's the conditioning. That's the system built to convince you that your worth is tied to your output. That unless you're producing, proving, performing, you're falling behind. So you keep going, you keep running, and you call it ambition. But sometimes it's not ambition, sometimes it's avoidance. Because as long as you're in motion, you don't have to face the truth. You're exhausted and unfulfilled, and there's no medal for burnout, no trophy for over-functioning, no real reward for sacrificing your soul on the altar of productivity. But we glamorize it, we celebrate the hustle, we glorify the grind, and we ignore the breakdowns happening behind the scenes. Because stopping feels like losing, because slowing down feels like giving up. But you're not meant to live like a machine. You're meant to feel, to breathe, to find rhythm, to know the difference between pressure and purpose, between performing and living, between being driven and being directed. Purpose doesn't scream. It doesn't beg for attention. It whispers. It shows up in quiet moments. When you ask yourself why you're doing all this in the first place, what it's all for, who it's really serving, and most people are too busy to ever hear that whisper. Too distracted, too reactive, too consumed by goals that don't even belong to them. You take on someone else's idea of success, someone else's standards, someone else's vision. And before you know it, you've built a life that impresses everyone else, but drains you at the core. You start chasing milestones instead of meaning. You get so focused on the next step that you forget to ask if it's even the right direction. And that kind of misalignment doesn't just show up in your career. It bleeds into your relationships, your sense of peace, your identity. You can't be present with the people you love because your mind is already on the next thing. You can't enjoy the life you've built because you're already building the next version of it. Always reaching, never arriving. Fulfillment doesn't come from checking boxes. It comes from alignment, from doing what actually matters to you, not what looks good to everyone else. It comes from knowing what your values are and having the courage to live by them. Even if that means disappointing people, even if it means scaling back, even if it means redefining what success means for you. Because chasing a dream that isn't yours will eventually feel like a burden. No matter how shiny it looks from the outside, one of the hardest things to do is to pause and ask, do I actually want this? Not, am I good at it? Not, will people be impressed? But, is this mine? Does this feed something deeper in me? Or am I just trying to outrun the discomfort of stillness? Because sometimes stillness is where the truth lies. Sometimes stopping is the most productive thing you can do, because it forces you to confront the life you're building and ask whether it's actually worth what it's costing you. You will regret the years you spent rushing if you never figured out what you were rushing toward. You will regret the people you lost because you were too distracted to see they were slipping away. You will regret the quiet moments you traded for noise. And when all the accomplishments are stacked and all the praise is gone, what you'll be left with is whether you actually lived or just performed. Living, there's no shame in slowing down. There's power in it. There's clarity in it. There's wisdom in saying no to what doesn't align, even if it used to. Even if you worked hard for it, even if it once made sense. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to change direction. You're allowed to want peace more than performance. You're allowed to stop trying to prove yourself to people who aren't even paying attention, because fulfillment isn't built in front of an audience. It's built in the moments no one sees. When you're honest enough to admit, this isn't it for me anymore. You grow up thinking loyalty is everything. That's sticking by someone no matter what is proof of your strength. That's showing up, staying through pain, holding people down even when it's costing you peace. That's what loyalty looks like. But no one teaches you the cost of loyalty without boundaries. No one tells you that you can love someone deeply and still lose yourself trying to prove it. No one explains that some relationships will demand more from you than they'll ever return. And if you're not careful, you'll spend years calling it love when it's actually self-betrayal. You stay in friendships that drain you. You defend people who never defend you. You put their needs first over and over again, hoping they'll one day realize how much you give. But they don't. They don't realize because you trained them not to. You've been giving too freely, saying yes too easily, swallowing the resentment, holding the weight, carrying the emotional load of two people while trying to make it all look effortless. That's not loyalty. That's fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear of what happens if you finally say, I've had enough. You confuse endurance with strength. You tell yourself, if I can just hold on a little longer, they'll change. You wait for the apology. You wait for the effort. You wait for the same kind of loyalty you keep giving. But what you don't realize is that your silence becomes their permission. Your forgiveness becomes their pattern. And your loyalty becomes their leverage. Because they know you won't walk away. They know you'll keep showing up. They know they can give the bare minimum and still get your best. That's when you lose your power. When your love becomes a guarantee, not a gift. There are people who will drain you and still say you're not doing enough. People who will take and then question why you're tired. People who will rely on your strength and then resent you for having boundaries. And the longer you stay in that space, the more you'll start to believe them. You'll start to think, maybe you are the problem. Maybe you do expect too much. Maybe you should be more understanding, more patient, more quiet. That's what unchecked loyalty does. It erodes your clarity. It makes you doubt what your soul already knows. That you deserve reciprocity, not obligation. Love is not a license to deplete yourself. Loyalty is not about self-sacrifice. If the relationship only works when you abandon your needs, it doesn't work. If being there for them means constantly leaving yourself behind, it's not healthy, it's toxic. And if you feel more exhausted than empowered after every interaction, you're not loyal, you're stuck. Boundaries aren't a betrayal. They're a filter. They show you who values your presence and who just values your usefulness. And the moment you stop overextending, you'll see who still chooses to stay. You are not here to prove your worth through suffering. You are not here to be the emotional crutch for people who refuse to stand on their own. You are not here to keep pouring into people who poke holes in your cup. Real loyalty is mutual. It's balanced. It doesn't ask you to bleed just to feel seen. It doesn't punish you for needing space. And it doesn't guilt you into staying when your soul is screaming for peace. If they love you, they won't make you earn it by constantly losing yourself in the process. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is walk away. Walk away from the roles that keep you small. Walk away from the people who only value your silence. Walk away from the version of yourself that accepted less just to avoid the pain of starting over. Because staying in something unhealthy out of fear or familiarity will only teach you how to survive, not how to live. And you weren't born to survive your relationships. You were born to thrive in them, to be loved back, to be met with the same level of presence, respect, and effort you keep giving out. You teach people how to treat you by the boundaries you enforce, not the ones you speak. So stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from your confusion. Stop justifying your exhaustion. Stop apologizing for the space you need to finally heal. The ones who truly care about you will never see your boundaries as rejection. They'll see them as a form of self-respect. They'll meet you at your level, not demand you drop lower to meet theirs. And the ones who don't, let them go. Release them without rage. Let peace be the closure. And let the lesson be the clarity you carry forward. You think once people start seeing your value, you'll finally feel it. That if you win enough, succeed enough, impress enough, the self-doubt will finally disappear. You chase titles, praise, validation, attention, thinking confidence is something you earn from the outside, and for a while it works. The applause drowns out the insecurity. The compliments silence the internal noise. You start to believe the version of you that everyone else loves must be the real you. Until the applause stops. Until someone criticizes you. Until the room doesn't light up when you walk in. And suddenly, everything starts to crack. That's the danger of building confidence on things that can be taken away. You attach your self-worth to your performance. You let other people's perception of you become your truth. You hand your identity over to the crowd and then wonder why it feels so unstable when they look away. That's not confidence. That's dependency. That's walking a tightrope every day just to feel like you're enough. And the moment life changes, as it always does, you lose the version of yourself you worked so hard to protect. No one talks about how empty success can feel when you achieve it from a place of insecurity. When you're doing it to prove something. When you're grinding for recognition instead of alignment. You get the reward, but it doesn't fill you. You reach the goal, but it doesn't quiet the voice that says, you're still not there. Because no matter how high you climb, if your confidence was built on approval, it collapses the second that approval disappears. And then you're back at zero. Not because you're not worthy, but because you never built the foundation where it really matters. On the inside, confidence built on external validation is always temporary. It's loud, it's flashy, it's convincing, but deep down it's brittle, because the real test comes in the silence when no one is watching, clapping, or cheering. That's where true confidence lives. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not when everything's going your way, but when it isn't. Can you still believe in yourself when there's no applause, no reward, no one calling your name? That's the part no one can teach you. That's the part only you can build, and it's built in the small, quiet moments. When you keep your word to yourself. When you say no even though it scares you. When you walk into the room and don't explain why you deserve to be there. When you don't chase, don't perform, don't overcompensate. When you choose discipline over drama. Truth over comfort. Integrity over being liked. That's where unshakable confidence grows. Not because you're perfect. Not because you never doubt. But because you've built a relationship with yourself that's not negotiable. You trust your own presence more than you trust anyone's approval. People always ask how to be more confident, and the truth is this: it's not about being louder. It's about being rooted. You don't have to prove anything when you're rooted. You don't have to compete. You don't have to beg to be seen. You don't have to over-explain or apologize for your existence, because when your confidence comes from who you are, not what you have or who likes you, it can't be shaken. That's the kind of confidence people feel when you walk in the room. Not arrogance, not entitlement, just grounded power. And that energy isn't loud, but it changes everything. You'll regret the time you wasted trying to be everything to everyone. You'll regret the years you spent performing for approval instead of showing up in truth. You'll regret shrinking yourself to be accepted. Because at the end of the day, none of it lasts. People's opinions shift, praise fades, circumstances change, and if you never built your identity outside of those things, you'll lose yourself every time life pulls the rug out from under you. That's not freedom, that's emotional slavery. It takes courage to build from within. It's slower, it's lonelier at times, it doesn't always come with recognition. But it's the only kind that lasts. The only kind that doesn't shatter when someone criticizes you, leaves you, overlooks you. And when you get to that place, where your confidence is self-sourced, you stop performing, you stop proving, you stop needing everyone to like you because you finally like you. And not in the highlight reel way. In the grounded, sober, real life way. That's the kind of confidence no one can give you, and no one can take.